All right. In 1974, artist Ntozake Shange wrote a series of monologues about 7 women. The lady in red, the lady in orange, the lady in yellow, the lady in green, the lady in blue, the lady in brown, and the lady in purple. And in 1976, those poetic monologues became known as the Broadway stage play for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. For colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. What Ntozake Shange called a choreo poem, also known as poetry set to music for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. So many people consider suicide when the world, when daily living, when the rainbow of deferred dreams, when love won and love lost, when struggle and challenge and confusion and complexity and crisis and disenfranchisement, when the bittersweet joy and pain of life just becomes too much for them. A gentleman who was born 93 years ago in Framingham, Massachusetts, to Italian immigrant parents. He was the editor of his high school newspaper and had plans to study journalism in college. Only his mother died of a heart attack, and his college plans were sidetracked. And he soon joined the United States Army Air Corps and became a military officer and a bombardier in World War II. And after leaving the military, he even became, for a while, an insurance salesman. And his life eventually brought him to the state of Ohio and to the city of Cleveland and to alcoholism. And on one winter morning, standing outside of a pawn shop in the most dangerous and dirty and sleazy part of Cleveland, with the rain falling on his shoulder-length hair, this 30-something-year-old man peered through the window into a pawn shop and saw a gun for sale on the shelf for $29. And as he looked at that gun, he thought about how his drinking had cost him everything that really mattered. His wife, his daughter, his job, his home, his self-esteem. And he reached into his rain-soaked pocket and pulled out 3 soggy $10 bills. And he bought that gun. And on his way to the small room he was renting, he happened into the local library. And he sat there, getting dry and continuing to contemplate the taking of his own life. This man had come to a place in his heart and in his mind and maybe even in his soul where he sought to end it all. His body and his spirit were weary, and he just wanted to kill himself. And as he walked through the library that morning, contemplating suicide, he passed by the self-help section and he pulled down a few titles from the shelf, and he sat in a chair at a nearby desk and he began to thumb through those books in front of him. And something, some word, some phrase, some idea, some concept, some sentence, some possibility, some notion of an inkling of something more and something better, some indescribable and very real energy rose up in him, enough to keep him from killing himself in that hour. And so he visited another library on another day, and he kept reading. And after that, he visited yet another library, this time in another city, and he kept reading. And it wasn't long before he had visited libraries all across this country, and he had read hundreds of success books by many authors. And all of this reading and absorbing and studying and absorbing and researching and absorbing all of those positive thinking ideas found in those many books, the sum total of all of that hope and inspiration, all those tips and strategies, all of that eventually alleviated this man's need and desire to drink. And his dependence on alcohol slowly and steadily faded into his past. And still, over even more time, this voracious reader of other writers became a prolific author himself. His first name was Augustine, and people called him Og, O-G for short. His last name was Mandino, M-A-N-D-I-N-O, Og Mandino. And I first heard the name Og Mandino from listening to a lecture given by Mr. Les Brown, who, as I've talked about before, was one of my early mentors. And that was years ago, like back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I first heard from Les Brown the name Og Mandino. And I never looked him up. I never read any of his books. But because I continued to follow Mr. Les Brown, I often heard the name Og Mandino because Les Brown would often bring up the name during one of his speeches. Og Mandino was one of Les Brown's mentors. So I was looking to Les Brown, and Les Brown was looking to Og Mandino. On September 3rd, 1996, best-selling author Og Mandino made his transition from this world on to the next plane of existence. He lived here on Earth for 72 years. In 1982, I was 16 years old. And in 1982, Og Mandino's book, University of Success, was published. The book is divided into 10 semesters, and we begin our first semester right now. And this first semester is guided by a thought from a 19th century pastor and author from Essex, England. His name was Charles Spurgeon, Spurgeon, Mr. Charles Spurgeon. And here's what he said. Beware of no one more than of yourself. We carry our worst enemies within us. Beware of no one more than of yourself. We carry our worst enemies within us, Mr. Charles Spurgeon. Beware of no one more than of yourself. We carry our worst enemies within us. That is our guiding thought for this entire first semester. And here is lesson number 1. How to look back on where you have been. How to look back on where you have been is our first lesson. And our lesson 1 thought comes from a woman who lived here on Earth 92 years. And like Og Mandino, she was born in the year 1923. And while she was here, she wrote 10 nonfiction books, including the New York Times bestseller, Advice from a Failure. Advice from a Failure. Her name was Jo Coudert, author of the book Advice from a Failure. And here is her thought that guides our first lesson. In order to plan your future wisely, it is necessary that you understand and appreciate your past. In order to plan your future wisely, it is necessary that you understand and appreciate your past.
The other thing is about life, when things happen to you, when you permit things to use you, you can't change the past, but you can interpret. You can reinterpret how you see it. For years, I was going around with a heavy load on my shoulders, feeling bad because I was adopted, doing interviews for adoption agencies and foster homes. And I was on television once, and I told these people in this particular interview that I was given away, my twin brother and I, when we were 6 weeks of age. A friend of mine, fortunately, was listening to the program. And she said, Les, I'd like to have lunch with you. And so I went over to see her. She said, when a woman carries a baby for 9 months, feeling that life movement in her, it's automatic and natural for her to learn to love that baby, to expect it to come here when she bears the pain to bring it into the world. Your mother, Mamie Brown, when she came in to adopt you guys, she didn't go through that process. She looked at whoever your biological mother was and said, I'll take him. You weren't given away less. You were chosen with love. Same circumstances, same event, but reinterpreted. An interpretation that empowers me. Am I making sense to you? Yeah. So when you begin to look at your past, give an interpretation that empowers you. That's where I used to be. That's not where I am now. I'm growing. Let me tell you something about the mind, how it uses you. Tell you something super stupid that I used to do. Do you know for years I hated my mother and my father, whoever they were, because they gave me away as I thought at that point in time? And guess what? I didn't have any faces for the hatred because I never saw either one of them. And I said, I hate them for that. And then once I forgave them and said, it's okay, had they not given me away, I would have never been blessed to have the mother that I have, who to me is the greatest mother in the world. So the universe unfolds as it should.
We are born a baby, we turn into a toddler, we develop to walking, we expand into running, and as full-grown adults, we find our wings and figure out how to fly. Maturity and growth bring perspective, and with perspective and experience, we are able to look back, not with a child's eye, but with an elder's wisdom, and we are able to reinterpret our past. That's a key phrase, reinterpreting the past. Reinterpret how you see the past. And here's the point of the first lesson, how to look back on where you have been. Here's the point of that lesson. Reinterpret your past to empower you in the eternal now. Reinterpret your past to empower you in the eternal now. One more time. Reinterpret your past to empower you in the eternal now. Each semester of University of Success is made up of a series of lessons, and each lesson comes from a leading success expert, a titan of industry, a trailblazer for the times in which they lived, someone who achieved mastery in their particular field of endeavor. And our first semester is comprised of 5 lessons. Now, Og Mandino wrote the introduction for this book. He compiled all the lessons and organized them in a progressive way to provide a pathway to success. And the actual curriculum lessons are taught by 50 thought leaders. And today's lesson comes from a man who was born in 1915 in Cleveland, Ohio. He graduated from college in 1935, and in 1936 he began his long and celebrated journalism career, writing for the Paris edition of the New York Herald Tribune. He covered Europe as a war correspondent for the New York News during World War II. He later became a freelance writer and a public speaker who often lectured on sexual and mental health. As an activist journalist, he often wrote about the social problems of his day, and he published his essays and critiques in national magazines and leading newspapers, for which he often received very prestigious awards over the course of his life and career. This man's writing and speaking eventually led him to television, where he produced a number of specials himself and appeared in even more shows and documentaries as a correspondent. He soon went on to conquer radio. This is a Renaissance man right here, working at a few networks as a producer and correspondent on a number of series. His name was Howard Whitman. And in 1956, Howard Whitman wrote a book called Success is Within You. Success is Within You. And our guiding thought for today's lesson comes from Howard Whitman, who wrote, until you acquire 5 essential ingredients, success will never be success. Until you acquire 5 essential ingredients, success will never be success. On Wednesday, January 29th, 1975, Howard Whitman suffered a stroke, and he left his earthly body, ascending to another realm of existence. Mr. Whitman lived on this planet for 60 years, and his legacy of teaching is our curriculum for today's lesson, how to fashion your own brand of success. So Mr. Whitman goes on to identify 5 constant factors of success. So in other words, if you were to identify X number of successful people and make an in-depth case study of those X number of successful people, according to Mr. Whitman, you would most likely find these 5 factors present in their successful lives. Number 1, purpose. This is a word we use here a lot, purpose. This is what he writes. One must know that in whatever he does, he is moving forward toward a goal. Aimlessness is the worst enemy of success. Now, underline that, circle, exclamation point, bold. Aimlessness is the worst enemy of success. Success, this is what he writes, success, to be true, must have an abiding sense of purpose. Otherwise, though one may vegetate successfully, one cannot live successfully. Purpose. We've spent much time in this space talking about purpose, and he notes here that purpose is a constant factor of success. So your success has to come to you and be experienced by you within the context of a larger purpose that is part of your consciousness. Purpose is really key. If you're just working to achieve material success, when you get it, that will never be enough for you. If there's not a larger purpose that is satisfying your soul, it really will not be enough for you. Aimlessness is the worst enemy of success. There has to be a larger intention behind you getting up and going out into the world every day. For what? What are you doing it for? Well, number 2 here is success has the intrinsic character of a batting average. This is a little more esoteric, but I think it'll resonate. It does not come all in one piece or all in one play. Not every hour nor every day is uniformly successful. Rather, there are upturns in success separated by valleys of failure. Every day is not a winning day. It's just not. Every day is not a walk in heaven. Success doesn't tend to look like that, but it's your batting average. When you average out the good and the bad and the ups and downs, am I moving in the right direction? That is a barometer of success. That's what he's saying here. That's what success is. As long as you're moving in the right direction according to your purpose. You can see how foundational purpose is, because if you don't know what your purpose is, how do you gauge whether or not you're moving the ball in the right direction? That's what he's trying to say here. You'll have hits of things. Things will come. A new dress will show up. A ticket to the opera will show up. There'll be hits of things that feel good and that you experience that tickle your emotions and make you feel like, oh, wow, that's great. And yet they'll fade and they'll pass, and this deep, dark, looming sense of aimlessness will return because those things didn't hit within the context of a larger purpose that you're going to meet, that you're here to fulfill. One of the reasons why we will self-define as not successful is because we compare ourselves to other people. We put people on pedestals. We put them as above us because of the material possessions that they have and the prominence that they have and the very public and wealthy spaces that they occupy in the public sphere and in the public square. And we compare ourselves to that. And those feelings of a lack of success are coming from those comparisons. It's an act of violence to compare yourself to someone else and your life and your mission to someone else's. It's an act of violence. It's self-punitive. It's unnecessary. We are each divine, original people. And you don't have to compare yourself, and nor do I, to anyone. There is no other fingerprint on this planet like yours. If that doesn't speak to our own uniqueness. Number 3, a third constant ingredient of success is the price of it. There is no success for free. The joy of success, it seems, must be counterbalanced by the effort to achieve it. And that's a mystical little aspect of human character which exists in all of us. Perhaps this is the yin and yang of existence in the Western world. The hooked half circle of joy nestles against the half circle of effort. Thus, tension and harmony share their oneness within the all-embracing arc. And in quite the same relationship, success and the price of it coexist as an inseparable whole. That is very true. That is very true. The joy you experience is directly related and proportional to the effort that it took you to achieve it. When somebody hands you something, you know, when your daddy just gives you the presidency of the company that he spent 50 years building, you're going to receive it, but not the same way that, as if you started in the mailroom and worked your way up to the front desk and worked your way up to the back cubicle and worked your way to a glass office on the corner and then worked your way up to the executive floor and then worked your way up to a senior vice presidency and then were handed the presidency of the company. That effort will create a whole other level of joy in your experience. A fourth essential ingredient without which success is not success is satisfaction. Success must be enjoyed. It may be won with tears, but it must be crowned with laughter. Otherwise, the effort may be worthwhile. It may be good or even great, but for the individual, without the inner laughter, which is known by another name as satisfaction, there can hardly be success. This has become one of the strange anomalies of our time, that so many have all the outward trappings of success without the essential inner trappings of it. They don't feel success. Instead of warmth inside, there is barrenness. The satisfaction of success need not be identifiable by anyone else or to anyone else, so long as the person himself knows it is there. Satisfaction, stemming largely from an attitude, is available to all in that it begins inside a central nugget deep in the strata of our souls. The last one here, number 5, and this to me is number 1, but it comes as a result of being grounded in the other 4. Yeah. Number 5, a final basic element of success is spirituality. It is hard to imagine anyone feeling successful without also feeling related somehow to the greater purposes of life and to the author of those purposes. Success is no straitjacket. It is no mold into which all must be poured. It is no rigid stamp. It is as individual as our fingerprints or the look in our eyes. All we need is the courage to be and realize ourselves. That last sentence is the key to everything. Really, that's the definition of success. The courage to be and realize ourselves. It takes a lot of courage to be yourself. If used properly, what material success can do for you is allow you the opportunity to be yourself, your real authentic self. For example, with a lot of money, you don't have to get up and go work for somebody doing something that you don't really want to do. With a lot of money, you can create your own business and do exactly what you want to do. You can be who you want to be in life. That's just the truth. So material success has a purpose. It has a function. If you use it wisely, it can help you to create an authentic life. Where many people get stuck is trying to wait for the material things to create an authentic life. You don't have to wait for that. This is a big one because a lot of people are waiting for the material to create the authenticity. The shift we want to make is to create the authenticity and let the authenticity create the material. Focus on creating an authentic life experience. Have the values you want to have, get the instruction on those values, and then practice those values. Cultivate the character you want to have. That's what the world is going to do. That's the function of the matrix, to keep you in a slave consciousness. That's what the matrix does, so that the architects and the agents can control you. Now, when you become conscious and see it for what it is, you have another level of responsibility in your life. You have God consciousness. So you know that nobody can make you a slave because you come from the Creator. And the Creator is expressing itself as you on this planet. When you know that, you can't be made to feel that you're not successful. If you take out a calculator and you put in some numbers, I liken that to putting in some information. You read a book and you hit the plus sign. You read another book and you go, oh, everything I read there is not quite true. Then you put in another number and you put the minus sign. And you might multiply and you might divide. But at some point in your life, you've got to hit the equal sign and know that you know that you know. You have to just hit that equal sign and know that you know, I am this sum. And then begin to live your life and create your life knowing that you are that sum. I know I'm this. I'm creating from this point of knowing. Very briefly, how am I fashioning my own brand of success? This is where I am. I have reached a place in my consciousness that I realize that life is an inside experience. Really what your life is the summation and the quality of the thoughts that you're thinking every minute of every day. That's really what your life is. The thoughts that you are thinking every single day. That's what life is. It's an inside experience. And so no matter what happens to me externally, I'm still having this inside experience about it. And so success to me, being spiritually rich and spiritually wealthy, is success. So even the darkness has its holy purpose if you have the consciousness to process it that way. It's important to be grounded in your purpose. We are talking today about Og Mandino's University of Success. And each semester of the University of Success is made up of a series of lessons. And each lesson comes from a leading success expert, a titan of industry, a trailblazer for the times in which they lived, someone who has achieved mastery in their particular field of endeavor. Our first semester at the University of Success is comprised of 5 lessons, and today is lesson 3 of 5, how to count your blessings. And today's lesson comes from Dale Carnegie, C-A-R-N-E-G-I-E, Dale Carnegie. And in lesson 3, how to count your blessings, Dale Carnegie's guiding thought is this. So listen up, brothers and sisters. This is the guiding thought from Dale Carnegie in lesson 3, how to count your blessings. Quote, feeling sorry for yourself and your present condition is not only a waste of energy, but the worst habit you could possibly have. Feeling sorry for yourself and your present condition is not only a waste of energy, but the worst habit you could possibly have. That's Dale Carnegie. Feeling sorry for yourself and your present condition is not only a waste of energy, but the worst habit you could possibly have. Dale Carnegie was a writer and lecturer who pioneered a series of self-help teaching courses into authoring the wildly popular and successful book, wait for the title, you've all heard it, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that book was published in 1936. Very, very, very popular book. Many of us have heard of and have read that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Brother Dale Carnegie, he left this planet in 1955 at the age of 66. And he left behind a legacy of books and sales training models. Many major corporations use the Dale Carnegie method in their sales training. So that is Brother Dale Carnegie's legacy. And in this lesson, How to Count Your Blessings, again, his guiding thought is feeling sorry for yourself and your present condition is not only a waste of energy, but the worst habit you could possibly have. How does feeling sorry for yourself, how does that show up in your life? Feeling sorry for yourself. What does that look like in your life? That's where Dale Carnegie is trying to get us to in this work. Let me read what he says here in chapter 3. About 90% of the things in our lives are right, and about 10% are wrong. If we want to be happy, all we have to do is to concentrate on the 90% that are right and ignore the 10% that are wrong. If we want to be worried and bitter and have stomach ulcers, all we have to do is to concentrate on the 10% that are wrong and ignore the 90% that are glorious. Simple wisdom, brothers and sisters. Simple wisdom. Simple wisdom. He goes on to say, and I have this highlighted, keeping our attention fixed on all the incredible riches we possess. Keep your attention fixed. So where's your heart? Right. Where's your heart? That's where your treasure is. We have to know that. We have to know what our soul stuff is and what we're made of and be at peace with that. So when you master what is in front of you, you create a magnetic force that is electric and it attracts more to you. And that all centers on your level of mastery. So my game is always to be a master at whatever I'm doing in the moment. Our theme today is gratitude, how to count your blessings. Dale Carnegie has written here in this third lesson, how to count your blessings. He says, we seldom think of what we have, but always of what we lack. Yes, the tendency to seldom think of what we have, but always of what we lack is the greatest tragedy on earth. It has probably caused more misery than all the wars and diseases in history. So let me leave you with Dale Carnegie today. Very simple wisdom in this lesson 3 of the University of Success, How to Count Your Blessings. Dale Carnegie says, listen to how simple this is. Count your blessings, not your troubles. That's it. Count your blessings, not your troubles. The University of Success is Og Mandino's handbook for achieving what you want in your life, for actually getting the goals you desire and living the dreams you dream. The book is a curriculum of sorts. It's a course comprised of 10 semesters with a series of lessons making up the coursework. We've been moving through this book Ogmandino's University of Success. We're in the first semester of this book, University of Success, and today is lesson 4 of 5. And today's lesson is called How to Recognize Your Failure Symptoms. So get out your pen and paper, grab the book if you have it, Ogmandino's University of Success, and prepare yourself, brothers and sisters, because we're going to do some work today. This is a workshop. Today's lesson 4, How to Recognize Your Failure Symptoms, comes to us from Dorothea Brande, Brande, and her book Wake Up and Live, which was published in 1936. During the very depths of the Depression, my parents were born in 1935. So this book was published in 1936. Dorothea Brande kicks off her teaching with this guiding thought, quote, "There are seeds of self-destruction in all of us that will bear only unhappiness if allowed to grow. There are seeds of self-destruction in all of us that will bear only unhappiness if allowed to grow." Dorothea Brande. So the question becomes, what toxic seeds, what seeds of self-destruction, as Dorothea Brande puts it, what toxic seeds are growing along with us? These are those seeds, those parasites, fungi, bacteria, infections, viruses, if you will, that are self-destructive, that are sabotaging our upward growth, development, and spiritual expansion. This will remind some of you of the inner saboteur, universal archetype that we all, to some degree, possess. And I want to start unpacking this lesson with the conclusions that Dorothea Brande draws in this work, Wake Up and Live, and then we can drill down on the specifics of how she arrived at these thoughts. Conclusion number 1. Besides being creatures subject to the will to live and the will to power, we are driven by another will, the will to fail or die. That's her first conclusion. Besides being creatures subject to the will to live and the will to power, we are driven by another will, the will to fail or die. Now, I would note here that the will to live is also known to us as the survival instinct. We've all heard that, the survival instinct. We all have that. That's the will to live. So there's that. That's the first conclusion. Besides being creatures subject to the will to live and the will to power, we are driven by another will, the will to fail or die. Conclusion number 2. We are victims to a will to fail. Conclusion number 3. Unless we see this in time and take action against it, we die without accomplishing our intentions. Unless we see this in time and take action against it, we die without accomplishing our intentions. Conclusion number 4. This is the last one. There is a way of counteracting that will to fail, which gives results that seem like magic. There is a way of counteracting that will to fail, which gives results that seem like magic. So those are Dorothea Brande's conclusions from her book, Wake Up and Live, which is the basis for today's University of Success Lesson 4, which is called How to Recognize Your Failure Symptoms. Page 26, Ogmandino's University of Success. Dorothea Brande writes, "We first experience and then later turn to realize the process of growth in ourselves. The individual emerges from childhood into adolescence, from adolescence into maturity, and at each of these crises, we find that the activities and interests of the old period are being replaced by those of the new. That nature is preparing the organism for its new role in the world, is actually reconciling us to the new demands on us by showing us pleasures and rewards in the oncoming state, which will replace those we must abandon. But the idea of another will, a counterbalancing will, the will to fail, the will to death, is not so readily accepted." Let's get into that. She writes on page 27, "Death is as much a fact of experience as birth and growth. And if nature prepares us for each new phase of life by closing off old desires and opening new vistas, it does not seem too difficult to think that we are always being slowly, gently reconciled to our eventual relinquishment of all we hold dear as living creatures, and withdrawal from struggle." Now we're getting into the meat of what the will to fail is. Withdrawal from struggle, abandonment of effort, releasing of desire and ambition would be normal movements in an organism which was being gently wooed away from its preoccupation with life. It is for this reason that we are entitled to look upon the will to fail as a reality. Now, these are examples. This is what a will to fail looks like in your life. Now, if inertia, underline inertia, timorousness, also known as nervousness, if inertia, timorousness, substitute activity, effortless effort, quiescence, and resignation were found only at the end of life or when we were drained by sickness or fatigue, if they never handicapped us when we should be in the full flood of our vital powers, there would be no reason at all for attacking this will to fail as if it were, as indeed it is, the arch enemy of all that is good and effective in us. But when it appears in youth or full maturity, it is as symptomatic of something wrong, deeply, internally wrong with one's life as untimely drowsiness is symptomatic of ordinary bodily ill health. Inertia, nervousness, substitute activity, effortless effort, quiescence, resignation. Let me read on a little more. In youth, we seldom recognize the symptoms in ourselves. We explain our reluctance to getting started as the natural timidity of the tyro, but the reluctance stays. The years go, and we wake in dismay to find that what once was a charming, youthful diffidence in us is now something quite different, sickly, and repellent. Or we find a convenient domestic situation to bear the brunt of excusing us for never having got to work in earnest. We could not leave this or that relative lonely and defenseless. Then the family grows, scatters, and we are left alone. The substitute activity at which we had been so busy is taken remorselessly away from us, and we are sick and terrified at the idea of turning back to take up the long abandoned plans. Now, what she's saying here, if it's not quite plain to you, is that when we're young, we get distracted by certain things. Most of the time, it's a good job, making good money. You can buy a car, you can buy a house, you can buy clothes. You get lulled into comfort. You start a family, you fall in love, and you get lulled into that stream of comfort and pleasure until the boo is gone, or the divorce comes, or the kids are out of the house, or the job ends, and you wake up one day and realize that what you really wanted to become, what you really wanted to do, hasn't happened. That's what she's saying right there. And what she's saying is that there are things that were operating all along that caused you to fail at becoming what you really wanted to do. And it's that list of things that I mentioned earlier. Inertia, nervousness, substitute activity. That's a big one for a lot of us. Substitute activity, quiescence, resignation, resigning yourself to your current position in life or station in life and not pushing through to move forward to become something greater. That's what she's talking about. So let's move forward. Page 28, Dorothea Brand writes in Ogmandino's University of Success, lesson number 4, how to recognize your failure symptoms that are causing you to fail in your life right now. She writes, most of us are under the necessity of choosing between work and starvation. And the employment we were able to find when it was imperative that we should begin earning is not work for which we are ideally suited. When marriage and the raising of a family have been undertaken, the necessity is all the more urgent. We might be willing to wait through a few thin years if no one but ourselves would suffer. But to ask others to do so takes more selfishness and more courage than most of us can muster. One reason why America, the much vaunted land of opportunity, can show so many men and women of middle age wasting themselves in drudgery, filling positions which bring them no joy, and looking forward to a future which at its happiest promises years of monotony, and at its worst, the nightmare of poverty-ridden unemployment. This necessity to fall upon the first work we can find is alone enough to explain why so few of us ever managed to bring our plans to fruition. Often, at first, we have a firm intention of not losing sight of our real goal, In spite of the fact that we must make a living at uncongenial work, we plan to keep an eye on our ambitions and to work at them by hook or crook, evenings, weekends, on vacations. But the 9-to-5 work is tiring and exacting. It takes superhuman strength of character to go on working alone when the rest of the world is at play, and when we have never had any evidence that we should be successful if we continued anyway. And so without realizing it, we are swept into the current of the will to fail. We are still moving, and we do not see that our motion is downstream. That's true, brothers and sisters. That's true. Here's what she says on page 28. This is very important. Most of us disguise our failure in public. We disguise it most successfully from ourselves. It is not hard to ignore the fact that we are doing much less than we are able to do. Very little of what we had planned, even modestly, to accomplish before a certain age, and never probably all that we had hoped. How many of us have said, I'm gonna do this by the time I'm 25. I'm gonna have this by the time I'm 30. By the time I'm 35, I wanna do this, this, and this. And by the time I'm 40, I'm gonna be here doing this. These arbitrary deadlines that we give ourselves that are based in age and reaching certain milestones. Yes. And we don't do it. We don't get there. We goal set, but we don't goal get. We make the list, we chart the age, we write down the outcome, but we don't actually get it. We set it, but we don't get it. And that's because there is operating, according to Dorothea Brandon, I do endorse this thought, there is a subtle, invisible, yet very active will to fail at work in your life. Here's what she writes on page 29. In the 50s, and sometimes earlier, it is usually safe enough to do a little disarming and semi-humorous grumbling. After all, few of our contemporaries are in a position to say, why can't you start now? And yet some of the greatest work in the world, many of the world's irreplaceable masterpieces, were done by men and women well past what we too superficially consider their prime. So we slip through the world without making our contribution, without discovering all that there was in us to do, without using the most minute fraction of our abilities, either native or acquired. If we manage to be fairly comfortable, to get some respect and admiration, a taste of, quote, a little brief authority, end quote, and some love, we think we have made a good bargain. We acquiesce in the will to fail. We even pride ourselves on our shrewdness, not suspecting how badly we have been cheated, that we have settled for the compensations of death, not the rewards of life. She writes, we suddenly wonder why we are running about like this, how we happen to be playing away at hide and seek as if our lives depended on it. What became of the real life we meant to lead while we have been off doing nothing or busy at work that provides us with no more than our bread and butter? Now, for a lot of people, brothers and sisters, it takes some time, possibly years, for them to get to a place where they realize that all they're really getting from their work is money, which allows them to buy things. It takes a time for many people to get to the end of satisfaction with the things before you awaken to the emptiness that they've caused. It takes time for people. And some people never get there, ever. Some people never get there. The things and the comfort and the pleasure lull them into a permanent state of sleepwalking. Many people. Og Mandino's University of Success. Lesson 5. How to conquer the 10 most common causes of failure. How to conquer the 10 most common causes of failure. Louis Benstock was a rabbi at Temple Shalom in Chicago. And in 1958, his second book, The Road to Successful Living, was published by Simon & Schuster. Mr. Benstock's first book, The Power of Faith, was published in 1952. And his third book, The Power of Maturity, was published in 1969. And it is from Louis Benstock that we receive today's lesson with this guiding thought. Very often, we are our own worst enemy, as we foolishly build stumbling blocks on the path that leads to success and happiness. That's Mr. Louis Benstock's guiding thought for today's lesson one more time. Very often, we are our own worst enemy as we foolishly build stumbling blocks on the path that leads to success and happiness. So keep that guiding thought in your mind as we move through this lesson 5, how to conquer the 10 most common causes of failure. Very often, we are our own worst enemy as we foolishly build stumbling blocks on the path that leads to success and happiness. Rabbi Benstock left his body and the planet in 1974. Today's lesson comes from Louis Benstock's book, The Road to Successful Living. So here we go. The 10 most common causes of failure, according to Louis Benstock, as written in his 1958 book, The Road to Successful Living. Number 1, blaming others. Blaming others. Number 2, blaming oneself. Number 3, having no goals. Number 4, chasing the wrong goals. Number 5, the shortcut, also known as there is no substitute for putting in the work. Number 6, taking the long road, also known as choosing the hard way. Number 7, neglecting little things. Number 8, quitting too soon. Number 9, the burden of the past. Number 10, the illusion of success. Let's take it from the top. The first common cause of failure, blaming others. On page 36, Louis Benstock writes, the first stumbling block is the age-old trick of blaming others. So according to Louis Benstock, blaming others is the first common cause of failure. He writes, rarely does the primitive mind look inside itself and ask, what in me is responsible for this? What in me is responsible for this? The more sophisticated mind, educated and civilized, learns to ask, what is there within me that caused me to think or not that thought, to feel or not that emotion, to do or not that deed? Page 37, he writes, a second stumbling block is the opposite of the first, the ready tendency to blame oneself. Blaming oneself, the second common cause of failure, according to Louis Benstock. Blaming oneself. Mr. Benstock goes on to write, instead of wrestling with the problem behind the failure and struggling to resolve it to prevent its recurrence, we blame ourselves and let it go at that. Instead of wrestling with the problem behind the failure and struggling to resolve it to prevent its recurrence, we blame ourselves and let it go at that. Blaming oneself, the second common cause of failure. Page 38. A third stumbling block is having no goals. Having no goals is a common cause of failure, brothers and sisters. Having no goals. A fourth stumbling block is choosing the wrong goals. Choosing the wrong goals. A fourth stumbling block is choosing the wrong goals. So the fourth common cause of failure, according to Louis Benstock in his book, The Road to Successful Living, is choosing the wrong goals. Let's dig into that. On page 40 of Og Mandino's book, The University of Success, Rabbi Louis Benstock, the teacher of today's lesson, writes this. This is a great sadness to discover after many years of struggle that attaining the object of your efforts will not bring happiness. Let's rewind that one more time. This is a great sadness to discover after many years of struggle that attaining the object of your efforts will not bring happiness. Often, it is a question of professional displacement, the practice of medicine, or of the law, or of management, which once promised all success and all happiness, may leave the practitioner weary and disillusioned, empty of hope. And when he has reached his 5th or 6th decade, he knows that it is too late to turn back to find contentment in another life. There are rare souls who have gathered their courage, faced the truth, and turned away from a lifetime of quote-unquote achievement to a calling that brought them peace. But most of us, I am afraid, would carry dissatisfaction with us. Most of us, dissatisfied or not, realize that we must go on to the end of the trail. We have begun badly and compounded the error through the years, but no further choice is possible. Here is a dangerous paradox. Most of our choices, vocational and domestic, are made when we are young, and yet the responsible man cannot easily take advice. He must find out for himself what life is all about. Often he is beyond the possibility of change when he comes to realize what happiness consists of. It takes great honesty and serious thought to be able to make a firm and confident choice before it is too late. Too many of us allow the choice to be made for us by family or circumstance and regret it later. Number 5 of the 10 most common causes of failure, Mr. Louis Benstock writes on page 41, a fifth stumbling block is the shortcut, also known as there is no substitute for putting in the work. There is no substitute for putting in the work. Let's dig into that. On page 41, Mr. Louis Benstock writes, an electric current will follow the line of least resistance. An electric current will follow the line of least resistance. But a bulb glows precisely because there is resistance. Many of us instinctively choose the shortest, easiest, quickest way to success, only to discover that the success was illusory, that the bulb did not glow. There have been too many platitudes about hard work. Hard work is only rarely pleasurable, but conquest of matter, mind, or soul is pleasurable. It is conducive to well-being, to happiness, and no conquest can be achieved without hard work. No conquest can give true pleasure if it has not required hard work. Too often the shortcut, the line of least resistance, is responsible for evanescent and unsatisfactory success. Now Rabbi Benstock leans in to this teaching by telling a story. So get into this story that he tells. He writes, I know of a man who is a magazine editor, and a good one, but he has known for 15 years that he was born to be a teacher. Teaching meant first the acquisition of a master's degree, then a slow start in a small school, a long period of hard work and low salary. He had a flair for writing and rewriting. It paid off quickly and opened a good future to him in magazine work. He took his choice consciously, and he is not miserable. He is a competent and respected man, but he is not entirely happy. He cannot feel successful. He is good-natured about it and views his failure quite sensibly, but it remains a failure. How many of us, brothers and sisters, know someone like that or are someone like that? He continues, there are other shortcuts. One is the refusal to observe established rules of decency and honesty. A good many of our higher bracket businessmen might have been just as rich, just as powerful, but more respected and infinitely happier if they had taken the slower and longer road of absolute ethical integrity and moral decency. The habit of sharp dealing, hard driving, seemed necessary to success. It was certainly quicker and more profitable. Some part of them is now forever cut off from happiness. Can this be called success? Can this be called success? All right, let's move on to number 6. A sixth stumbling block is the exact opposite of the fifth, taking the long road. Taking the long road, also known as choosing the hard way. Choosing the hard way. So the sixth most common cause of failure is taking the long road, also known as choosing the hard way. How many of us, brothers and sisters, have over the course of our journey chosen the hard way? Let's go to page 42. Louis Benstock writes, a sixth stumbling block is the exact opposite of the fifth, taking the long road. quote the ancient biblical commentators in explaining why God did not lead the children of Israel to the promised land via the short, straight route up through the land of the Philistines, requiring only an 11-day jaunt, but instead led them over a long, circuitous route through the wilderness for 40 years, said that it was in order that the slavery-conditioned people might gradually prepare themselves for the wise use and enjoyment of freedom. But we learned that the entire adult generation that left Egypt, died in that wilderness. They took so long in getting to the promised land that they never got there. The longest way round is not always the shortest way home. Too often, if you wait or travel too long, you never reach home. Number 7, page 43. Rabbi Louis Benstock writes, the 7th stumbling block is neglecting little things. The 7th stumbling block is neglecting little things. Page 43. And Rabbi Benstock here leads us into a story. He writes, at a prayer meeting in an old country church, a pious member was overheard imploring fervently, "Use me, Lord, use me, but in an executive capacity. Use me, O Lord, use me, but in an executive capacity." Page 44. The good executive keeps his finger on the little things. He knows that they may, if mishandled, become big problems. To an operating surgeon, there are no little things. Every slightest detail is a matter of life and death. To a lawyer, an obscure and minute legal confusion may cost a client liberty, even life. To a clergyman, there are no small problems. In a human soul, there is nothing unimportant. We must appreciate the details. We must care for them. And as the New Testament tells the parable of a nobleman who, finding that a servant had handled a small assignment with unusual success, said to him, "Well done, thou good servant. Because thou wast found faithful in a very little, have thou authority over 10 cities. The 7th most common cause of failure, neglecting little things. And that brings us, brothers and sisters, to number 8, the 8th most common cause of failure, according to Louis Benstock, as written in his 1958 book, The Road to Successful Living. Page 44. The 8th stumbling block is quitting too soon. Let's repeat that once more. The 8th stumbling block is quitting too soon. Quitting too soon. On page 45, he writes, often it is not the wrong start, but the wrong stop that makes the difference between success and failure. Often it is not the wrong start, but the wrong stop that makes the difference between success and failure. To quit while we're ahead would be silly. To quit when we're behind is even sillier. It requires will to hold on a little longer. It requires wit to know that the measure of success is not the luck, the breaks of the game, but the conquest of failure. The 8th most common cause of failure is quitting too soon. Number 9. The 9th stumbling block is the burden of the past. The burden of the past is the 9th most common cause of failure. Page 45. Memories of the past can infuse us with courage and confidence and creative power, or they can bind us in a dark shroud of dejection and defeat. Even the joys of the past can shackle us. I know men and women so proud of their ancestors' names, achievements, or accumulations that they are unable to strike out in new directions for themselves. I know men so spoiled by one early success that there remains no further impulse to accomplishment. But discouraging memories are more common. The memory of pain, of loss, of previous failure can make life seem not worth the living. Often this is temporary. We see it among the bereaved, or among suddenly liberated prisoners, or among refugees who have been through all the horrors of modern life and have never known its joys. And depressing memories tend to congeal, to harden. We carry them like weights, and we lose our ability to transform them into creative energies. Tomorrow's problems are unknown. They may cause new pain. Yesterday's are over with. They are still painful, but the pain is familiar, almost comfortable. It is easier, less risky to be static, to take what comfort we can out of our accustomed miseries. And sooner or later, we find ourselves incapable of moving forward. We are trapped in the quicksand of our own regrets. There are times when we must take a step or two backward to orient ourselves. But our drives should be forward. Our instincts should be for advancement. Remember that life is growth, and in ceasing to grow, in fearing the new, we deny life. The ninth most common cause of failure is the burden of the past. And so we come, brothers and sisters, to number 10, the 10th most common cause of failure. The 10th stumbling block is the illusion of success. The illusion of success. On page 46, he writes, "Many of us are deceived by an event, an accomplishment. It has all the marks of success, and others act as though it were a success, but it fails to satisfy us. We shrug off our doubts. We agree that we have arrived. We don a mask and accept the high popular opinion of ourselves. At that point, we have stopped trying to be ourselves. We have accepted praise or money, identified it with happiness, and assumed that success was ours. Further accomplishment seems unnecessary. We have abjured or renounced the right to go on to true success." Page 47. We cannot suffer from illusory success unless we are so foolish as to consider public success an end in itself. The trouble is that most of us have not learned to disentangle the notions of vulgar success and personal success. We constantly aim for goals of which we think others will approve, and we are pained to find that they have little to do with true happiness. Louis Bendock, in his Lesson 5, How to Conquer the Most Common Causes of Failure. That's the title of this lesson. And after identifying these common causes, which we have just done, the next point of focus is how to conquer them, how to conquer the 10 most common causes of failure. And for that, let's turn to the word itself, conquer. What does it mean to conquer? One of the definitions for the word conquer is this, and I like it: to gain dominion. To gain dominion. I like that. To gain dominion. How do we gain dominion over these 10 most common causes of failure in many of our lives? How do we gain dominion over our causes of failure? That, brothers and sisters, is the work.